the opportunity is abundant, right? So it's not a closed market anymore. I think if you have the right mindset and if you hustle hard to get the right partners on board, I think there's just no. It's so much fun to just build and show value to the world, and make something meaningful that outlives you, right? Leaving a lasting legacy.
Hi everyone. Please welcome to the next episode of Web3 Normies. Unfortunately, my co-conspirator Raghu could not make it today. He is under the weather, but we will still hopefully have a great episode without him. And today we have with us Ganesh Swaminathan, the CEO and co-founder of Covalent. And of course, I will leave it to him to kind of explain what it is. But uh, Ganesh lives in Vancouver, and he's one of the founders in this space who's a repeat founder. So there is a lot that we can learn from what Ganesh has done in his past. And just for full disclosure, Woodstock is an investor in Covalent, so I should just get it out of the way. But yeah, without much more ado, I think we should get into this. And Ganesh, welcome to Web3 Normies.
Thank you, Prashant. So another disclosure from my side, even though Prashant and I have the same last name, we're not related by any means, though we don't have the DNA test to confirm. I'm sure, back in the day, we come from the small little village somewhere. But yeah, no, excited to be here. Thanks, Prashant. And Raghu, hope you feel better soon.
Hey, on that topic, I think we did have a very quick discussion. I think we zeroed in on somewhere near Kumbakonam in Tamil Nadu, where we come from. So yeah, at some point we should pick up that conversation again to see where our lineage, intersects. But I'm sure that there is something interesting over there as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Absolutely.
Getting into the meat of this, right? So just for everyone's benefit, Ganesh, if you could just give us a bit about your background. I know you are a repeat founder, so would love to understand how your journey has transpired and how this led to you founding Covalent.
Absolutely. So there's no set path by any means. I think life has its own plan for you. So I'm a physicist by training, started doing cancer drug research initially. That's how I started my career, doing mostly in silico protein design, which is a new form of protein design as opposed to in vivo or in vitro protein design. So did that for about half my career. Unfortunately, the biotech space is so slow that it takes about 10 years to get an MVP out. That's how slow the space is. And the way the companies there work is you actually even go public. So this company that I was part of the founding team, it's listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and but the product is still only in phase 2 trial. So this is a drug for breast cancer and a drug for ovarian cancer. So that's really where I got my taste of startups. I've always wanted to start a startup, but didn't know how to do it and how to do anything about doing a startup. I was infatuated with the idea of a startup. I read Michael Dell's book. I read Bill Gates's book. Back in the day, and someday I thought I'll have my own startup. So for me, the best way to get exposure is to go start or go join another startup rather than start my own. So did that for a couple of years, and then the pace was just grinding me down. A lot of my peers in technology, that's just when the cloud and mobile and social was starting to emerge, and they were going through founding a company and getting an acquisition offer or an M&A transaction in 18 months or less. And I'm starting to miss that pace where here I'd spent 2 years and I have like a white paper out. So that's when I said, what, this is not for me. It's time for me to pivot my career. So I exited the biotech pharma industry into just the big data infrastructure space. So that was about 10 years ago. I'm a lot older than I look. The camera has this filter where it removes all the gray hairs. But so over the past 10 years, essentially what I've been doing is a lot of the data warehousing workloads have started to move from on-prem deployments to the cloud. So this is cloud native architectures like Snowflake and BigQuery and Redshift. And that was getting really, really popular around like 13, 14, so almost a decade ago. And And so I did that for a couple of years, built a very successful consulting practice in that realm. So I knew that entire stack end to end. And I think the bigger story there is I'd seen the transition of technology that is replatforming to the cloud using things like mobile and social as accelerators. So that was really, really, insightful and, great in terms of my thinking and my learning. And then around 2017, maybe around November, what it rains a lot in Vancouver here. It's despite what they tell you on the news. And so just one weekend, a friend of mine told me, "Hey, there's a database hackathon. Why don't you guys, check this out?" And so we went out and built a very simple kind of prototype. So essentially, I'd heard a lot about blockchains and stuff like that, but I had mostly written it off as a joke because I'm used to 15,000, 20,000 transactions per second. And the blockchain, Ethereum at that time was like 15 transactions per second. And I didn't really understand the ethos. I didn't understand why this was important and why this is so transformative. Anyway, so I went out there and me and my friend built out this prototype. Essentially, I'd missed all the ICO stuff, all that craze. I hadn't I was just like on the periphery. Wasn't in the game, and so it's like all these transactions are on the blockchain. But I know from a institutional, from an enterprise use case that they would never adopt new tools. So they need a bridging middleware kind of solution. And so what we ended up building is essentially a middleware, a simple translator that translates these. You can basically pull blockchain transactions, Ethereum transactions into Excel. So that's the best of both worlds. Like it's almost like a bridging solution that connects databases and blockchains. We ended up winning that hackathon, and then we were still running the old like the consulting startup. But you said, you know what? Why don't we make this a product? And then decided to start Covalent. So that's where Covalent, the name comes from. Covalent bonds in chemistry. So a little bit of a homage to my past. And covalent bonds, we're binding databases and blockchains. It's a bind or the bridge between Web 2 and Web 3, whatever analogy you want to say. So that's really the genesis story of Covalent. Started as a very simple hackathon kind of idea to starting an idea and an idea to a company, to a product, to an actual force in the industry. And we can dig deeper into that journey, but it wasn't simple by any means. I'll tell you just that please don't take my advice for the timing, because the timing for starting Covalent was the worst timing, because 18 and 19 was just dead. And nobody, like there were no conferences. There was we went to Consensus in 2018. I believe Consensus last week, there was like 25,000 people. Consensus in 2018 had like 500 people. And it was all just the suits, right? There was just no builders, nothing going on. So that was the worst time, or maybe the best time to start a startup, depending whether you're a glass half full, glass half empty kind of guy. But yeah, so that's really the past to the Covalent journey.
That was wonderful. Couple of things there, right? So I also started in this space in 2018. So completely echo the sentiment. I think it's not the greatest time for builders because you don't have a lot of support, but it's probably a very good time for investors because a lot of hype and noise dissipates. So if someone is still seriously building at that time, and valuations are also, I guess, a bit more moderate. So it's a better time for an investor. But yeah, man, I mean, 2018-19 was brutal. I remember. Slight digression here, since you mentioned your past on biotech. Do you have any specific views on De-Sci, decentralized science, and do you think this has the potential to shorten the time frame on things like biotech, which you said was like close to 10 years to get to MVP?
Yeah. So if you understand the supply chain of taking a drug and taking it to market, essentially there's what is the roadblock there? The roadblock is not the research. There's actually a lot of research. The roadblock is the FDA. It's that approval process, because you don't want to do untested drugs on regular people. That's why you have such a rigorous process. So you can have the ideation. You can have, in fact, these in vitro experiments. They have robots doing thousands of experiments a second, like in mass arrays. So that's really not the blocker. So if you decentralize this, if you get other kinds of like venues, you have. Those are good things, but you still come to that FDA single choke point, right? So if the goal here is to get more drugs with higher efficacy and more effectiveness out in the market, that choke point is still the FDA. So That's not really
Yeah.
going to massively, like, that's still that single door that you have to pass it through. But generally, I think today, with folding at home and projects like that, people can contribute to the compute and the
Yeah.
resourcing in terms of this drug design, which is all a very positive thing for society.
Got it. Yeah, and I guess regulatory arbitrage is not what you should look for when it comes to drugs, as opposed to when it comes to finance. Anyways, I don't want to digress too much on that. So let's dig into Covalent, right? Just from your perspective, if you can lay it down in terms of what is Covalent, why is it so important, and if if you can also probably draw some analogies from Web 2 in terms of how should people think about Covalent vis-a-vis, say, Google Analytics, or whatever you think is the right perspective, right? Would just want to get like a quick ELI 5 from you about Covalent.
Absolutely. So maybe instead of talking about the past, let me talk about the future, because a lot of these Web3 crypto products are still very futuristic. So the best way to realize and understand the potential for something like Covalent is to suspend belief, think, and imagine what the world will be like in 5 years. And what we think will happen is there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of different blockchains, different layer ones, whether this is ETH 2.0, whether this is Solana, one of the L ones, one of the alt L ones, one of the L2s, one of the rollups. Nobody really knows. But what's clear is that blockchains have reached escape velocity, and they're things that, it's here to stay. But at that point, what's going to happen is that user data and user assets are going to be fragmented across all of these disparate data systems, blockchains, rollups, and so on. And that is a genuine problem, right? So if you scale back, the solution that we've built for this futuristic world is this unified interface to pull out all user data and user assets. So you have the what we've done over the past couple of years is basically gone out and scraped all blockchain data, normalized and canonicalized that so it has the same shape, it looks like the same, it's isomorphic, and then provide that database, that single canonical database, to upstream products. So you can use this via an API, you can use this via like an analytics tool, and so that's really what Covalent does. So it's that middle bridging ground. So now what has happened is that on the supply side, you have, today we've actually crossed 100 blockchains. So we have literally have 100 blockchains that have been indexed across mainnets and testnets. And I think by end of next year, it'll be over 1,000 because of the pace this space is moving. And then on the demand side, we have use cases across basically every vertical, right? So if you look at the wallet space, something like Rainbow uses Covalent's API to pull out user assets and balances and positions and so on. We're big in like the DAO space, so something like Tally uses us, Boardroom uses us. We're big in the NFT space, so NFTX uses us to pull out like NFT assets, NFT images, NFT data, and so on. All the way to the taxation space. So a big four today, all of the US taxation crypto data is powered by Covalent. So that's pretty big. To an institutional bank with tens of millions of customers using us for their DeFi, they have like a crypto section. So that's really what is happening today. But really how we think about this is that the Web 2 and the Web 3 will merge. And just like how traditional banking and fintech kind of merge, so you have fintech native startups as well as banks introducing a online banking experience. The same thing is going to happen with all of these big use cases. So your DeFi and fintech are going to merge. So you see this already with the big institutional banking company that I mentioned, to Robinhood adding Web3 crypto experience to their app. So basically every single fintech product today will think of a Web3 kind of Rails, off-chain, on-chain, something of that sort in the next 5 years, because the younger generation, they're going after collecting these digital assets. They're not going and signing up for Questrade or E-Trade and buying like mutual funds and ETFs. So it's a different kind of like investment thesis. So that's happening in that world. In the NFT space, again, this is very groundbreaking, all the way from the digital art. So for the first time ever, people have a native platform for digital art. So far, everything has been analog art that has been digitized. So you still have these prints and so on, but nothing is actually truly native. So NFTs is the first time these digitally native artists have a platform to distribute their art. And beyond that, there's all the NFT use cases. Like I think even like invoices and accounts receivable and all of those traditional backend office things will be tokenized and put on the blockchain, and they're all NFTs. So now you can bundle these NFTs. All the things that are happening in the capital markets today, where you bundle and pool the debt, same thing is going to happen on the blockchain. Just it's a lot faster. To something like GameFi, where a lot of the traditional Web 2, Web 3, or the traditional AA, AAA games are now adding a Web 3 experience. And I think in the next 2 years, there's going to be lots of Web AA studios releasing games with a blockchain backend. And you can see like a lot of things are going in motion. And so it's almost like an indexed bet, like with Apple cutting off the advertising avenues for these gamers. So none of the mobile games are actually able to monetize now. So they're all looking at a Web3 kind of venue. So a lot of things are happening in motion, but where Covalent sits is a very interesting vantage point. We're like an indexed bet on the entire use case on the demand side. So it doesn't really matter. In fact, what we do is every year we change the flavor of the day, right? So in 2020, we were the best De-Fi API. In 2021, we were the best NFT API. And then we were the best GameFi API when Axie Infinity was hot. Now we're like decentralized social. Like it doesn't really matter. The demand will just pull the products out of the API. So that's really what Covalent is in a nutshell. So today we're a team of about 60 people that's fully committed to the mission of enabling these pioneers of tomorrow to build really compelling Web 2, Web 3 kind of experiences.
Got it. No, that's very well put. I guess in a way, you are blockchain agnostic. You're also in a way narrative agnostic, because whatever narrative gets created, whoever wants to build whatever, at some point has to tap into the large amounts of data on any of these chains, right? So as long as you guys have indexed it and make it easier for people to access, I guess they will have to use it in any shape or form. But also therefore implies that you guys also have like a good handle on the type of amount of data that is kind of being gathered on each chain. So if I can ask, through the bear market of say last 6 to 9 months, are there any particular chains, or roll-ups or app chains where you have seen like, wow, this is kind of like, these are like the top 3 or top 5 chains that have seen most activity, right? I mean, typically the usual suspects are Ethereum, Polygon, pretty much, right? Solana here and there. But like, does your data tell you like these are like certain chains that people are not looking at, but your data tells you that there is a lot more happening there?
So a couple of insights we can glean from that. We do have all the demand side and the supply side traction. So that's a very compelling kind of story we can weave. So first thing that's surprising is that we crossed probably 50 chains this time last year. So so we indexed about 50 chains. Definitely during the latter half of last year, there was a flight to quality. What that meant is a lot of the Me Too completely undifferentiated EVM chains had no legs to stand on. So we saw a lot of the assets, a lot of the user data being pulled out from those chains onto Ethereum. So it was a flight to quality. So that was interesting. My thesis is that the world is diverse, and just like the database world, where you have over 500 databases, and they're different sizes and forms, and it's never one size fits all. I think the same thing is with blockchains. There's always going to be a wide spectrum of database blockchains for different use cases. But it was interesting to see how there's not a lot of diversity in the blockchain space. They're all mostly EVM. They're all mostly the same kind of tech, because it's so easy to take a blockchain to market. At least the funding market was very easy. That's why so many L1s and L2s are getting funded. So that was like one interesting point, where just because you have an EVM sidechain or an EVM rollup, it's not that compelling. You still have to build an ecosystem around it. The second thing, which is very interesting, is Polygon. So Polygon has stayed with their traction over the bear market, while multiple markets just collapsed, like Solana collapsed. Obviously Luna went to zero, Luna Terra went to zero. Polygon has held its stay. So I think that speaks to the crypto native use cases. So a lot of people just come as tourists, and you see a lot of like Web 2 companies doing like drops, Salesforce and Starbucks and Nike and so on. Those guys have all taken a seat back in the last, especially after FTX, because nobody wants to risk their job. So the crypto native use cases are tremendous. Like our biggest traction still comes from crypto native use cases, right? So the Web 2 guys are still early in that game. So that was very interesting that Polygon was able to hold on to its dominance in terms of traction, while Solana and some of these other ecosystems kind of collapsed. The third thing that is super interesting is that when you have this roll-up technology that is coming up now with multiple roll-up technologies like OP stack, which is the optimism stack, to supernets, to subnets, to so all of these roll-ups that are settling on a layer one or layer two, it almost defeats the purpose of having a standalone alt one, alt L1. So why would you want to have an alt L1 which nobody cares about, nobody deploys it, when you can really be a roll up on an Ethereum chain and then just outsource the security to Ethereum, right? So that's like there's no value prop really. So that was very compelling. I'm surprised at how fast the roll up technology has picked up steam. So if you see and just take the OP stack for example. So 6 months ago, the OP stack was nobody knew about this, right? Nobody knew that you could take Optimism and make it a composable stack. Today, they're not only OP stack is live, like Coinbase's base rollup is also an OP stack. You have now multiple rollup as a service companies that are now servicing the OP stack. Same thing is happening with Polygon. Same thing is happening with ZK Sync. So all of these rollup things is crazy. So I think we'll hit that 1,000 mark rollups, if you can call a rollup as a database, even earlier than next year. So you just outsourced all of the execution. Something else that's very interesting is that Cosmos, for all its hype, does not really have the traction that it warrants. So just as a pure numbers, pure traction kind of standpoint, the biggest DEX on Cosmos, which is Osmosis, is 1/100th the size of Uniswap. So it shows you how small the Cosmos ecosystem is. So I'm not sure what is going to change in the next like year and a half that changes that like adoption curve. So I think these are like super interesting from from a position standpoint. From a non-EVM chain, I'm not seeing a lot of like sticky traction. You see obviously Sui and Aptos and other chains like in this cycle that are starting to get funded, but it's not clear if that traction is sticky. Everyone thought Solana's traction was sticky, but once FTX collapsed, all that traction on Solana just evaporated. So I'm not sure if it's sticky. It's still early to say. But clearly on the EVM, there's solid pieces of technology, like everything, like from the wallets to the RPC providers to indexers. EVM is our mainstay, like everything around Ethereum, Arbitrum, Optimism, Polygon, Avalanche, Phantom. That's really the magic here. To something like Gnosis Safe, right? Gnosis Safe is such a solid piece of infrastructure that's pure EVM only, right? And you don't really have a multi-sig wallet out there on a non-EVM chain that has been around for 5 years with zero hacks and has like hundreds of millions of dollars of like audits gone in and usage, and with I think $40 billion under assets, right? As a non-custodial like safe. So there's a lot of like Lindy effect going on here. The strong become stronger. So that's really what I'm seeing from an adoption curve. But I don't think there's a bear market, to be frank. I am working like a bull market right now. My team is working like a bull market right now. We've been so busy. Like in Q1, we closed 30 new chains. We indexed 30 new chains, right? Wow. So just so busy in terms of like all the activity that's going on. Now it's so busy that, we were in Hong Kong, we were at Consensus. I'm going to be in LA next week. My other team is going to the Avalanche Summit in Barcelona. It's just like so much going on. So I don't think maybe the bottom was the FTX hack from last year, but I think things are starting to like you see those little bubbles at the bottom, then you boil water, and then the water boils, right? So it's like you're seeing the early signs. So yeah.
Oh, that's great. Actually, like I think digging deeper into your data and getting your insights, I think there's a lot of alpha in there because you see a lot of it at the ground level in terms of what's happening on a lot of these chains, right? And more traction, more users, whatever you guys see implies, more kind of like network effects that you can solve into, right? So which is why I was very curious to see how you saw this entire data space. Bear market, completely agree. I mean, especially going back to 2018-19, this doesn't feel anything like it in terms of the amount of work we have to do. Even in terms of deal flow, I think it's slowed down a bit, but there's still significant amounts going on. Yeah, I don't know if like the macro implies there will be another pullback, but I don't see it sustaining for too long. Even if it does, I think price is one thing, but activity is another, and activity has not slowed down, right? And that's what we want to see, which is actually great. I just want to double click on this point you made on supply demand. Usually, when founders think of building any products, right? There is supply and there is demand that you have to solve for. Some people try solving for demand first, and some people try for solving for supply first, right? You guys, I think, have like focused more on the supply side by having like indexed so many of your chains already, right? And now I guess you're probably. I just want to understand like how do you think about this, and why did you prioritize one side over the other? And if you could also slightly touch upon on the when you do talk about the demand side, how do your various products lay out? Are you focusing on retail, institution, etc.?
So it's actually the opposite. We focus on demand side first rather than supply side.
Okay.
So our demand side is much, 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 much bigger than our supply side, and that's why Covalent is around while every other competitor has kind of evaporated. So I'll tell you what's happening here. So I'll give you an analogy with another very popular decentralized protocol that they're OGs in the space. I don't want to name them, but a couple of years ago, we just came out of this bear market. I think De-Fi summer was hitting. This would have been like in the summer of like 2020, and we're sitting down and saying, okay, now we have a little bit of cash. We have this like MVP kind of built out. Something is promising. What is a path you would go to market? So I said, let's go hardcore after the demand side. And if you aggregate all of the demand, the supply will automatically come in to get that demand. And this whole thing will only work if the supply is disparate, right? That's only when you need a middleware. The other project said we're going to go after the supply side and scale hardcore on the supply side and not focus too much on the demand side. Anyway, so the way, so I'll talk about that other project. What they did is, because it's decentralized and they scaled up the supply, what they did is they recruited, I think, almost 10,000 operators to run their like decentralized infrastructure and all of that stuff. And what they did is, because there was no cash to incentivize these guys to run actual hardware, they had to print more of the tokens, increases inflation, so that they can compensate these real bare metal infrastructure providers to run the decentralized network. And then those guys, obviously, because they have solid hardcore costs, fixed cost, essentially, the investment in the infrastructure, they had to dump the token in order to pay in fiat, which crashed the price of the token. So now they're massively retracted the supply side, scaled it back to a few hundred rather than a few like thousands. And they basically lost, 2 years of market penetration. What Covalent did is we never focused on the supply side as much, right? So the first 2-3 years, we only had Ethereum. We only added Polygon in 2021, actually. And then we scaled up to 100 chains only in the last 2 years. So even in the summer of 2021, we only had probably less than 10 chains. So 2 years ago, we only had less than 10 chains. It's only in the last, I would say, 15 months or so, we scale up the supply side massively. But on the demand side, we put a majority of the focus. So if you look even at the team composition, over half the people work on the demand side, from the engineering, from the go-to-market, right? Last year, we did 10 hackathons, for example. No, we did 45 hackathons, sorry. So including virtual and, real life. So we did all like the Avalanche Summit, the Polygon Summit, the Phantom hackathons, every single ETH Global. So we did ETH India, we did ETH New York, ETH SF. So we did a lot. All of that is demand side. The number of endpoints, we've scaled up to about 150 SKUs on the demand side. We built a second product called Increment to fix on the demand side. So the majority of our focus is on the demand side, because if you don't have paid, validated demand, then your supply is kind of pointless. So today, I would say, if you look at the gas fees, the transaction fees that the revenue to a miner or a stake operator, it's from inflation and the transaction fees. The transaction fees is where you hit product market fit, where you have essentially cash flow positive for that network. And none of the networks are actually cash flow positive today, right? From a transaction fee perspective.
Yeah.
And as the technology becomes faster and better and cheaper, the gas fees actually reduces in quantity, and therefore it's getting even harder to become cash flow positive. So
Mm.
so our take is like go hardcore after demand side. So today, what has happened is as a result of our penetration to the market with thousands and thousands of like developers, we have, I think, like 40,000 developers. We have over 1,000 applications across all these different spectrums. We've been able to partner with all the RPC vendors. So if you look, ChainStack, Pocket, NodeReal, all of these RPC vendors, they've now partnered with Covalent, and now we're that data API partner for all of these RPC vendors because we have the demand side, we have the validated, the actual good product on the demand side. Because indexer by itself is just a commodity piece, right? So
Yeah.
it's just you scrape all the data and then you just put it in here. So the demand side is where we majority focus. And in hindsight, the choice of focusing 100% on the demand side was the right choice, because if we had focused on just the supply side, then we would just have indexed like X number of chains,
Yeah.
and then it will become more and more difficult to get more supplies. It's almost like a flywheel, right? The more demand you have, the more developers you
Mm.
have, more people on the supply side are attracted for getting those demands because we fill up their block
Yeah.
space, right? So we
Yep.
help
Yep.
bootstrap their
Definitely.
wallet network. And because of the unified API, they just have to change one character, and now they have access to all these newer chains. That's why in Q1, all the big chains like the Coinbase chain and the Consensus zero knowledge EVM, the Polygon zero knowledge EVM, ZK Sync, Mantle, to Scroll, all of that is inbound, right? Because of the
Mm.
demand that Covalent has.
No, it's wonderful. And it's funny, right? Because I probably dug into it when this became a topic of discussion for Fund 2 within Woodstock. At that point, I think you had already indexed, I think, 50 plus, because this was the second half of last year. So it did feel like, wow, it's already that many. And that's probably where the focus is. So your answer kind of like is a bit enlightening, right? In the sense that you only started doing that in like the last 6 to 9 months because you had already pretty much not solved for, but at least you had aggregated a lot of demand, and then this became a good flywheel for you guys. So okay, super interesting. I'm glad I actually brought that up. Now, like, in terms of competition, right? Again, I mean, I don't know if you're that early anymore. I think you're not that early. But anyways, there is still like a lot of growth that can happen in Web3, right? And there is this overlap of 2 and 3 as well. How do you like think of competition at your end? To me, like there are two separate types of competitors here, right? One is our crypto native competitors. Like you have your Graph, which is probably the closest competitor, but still like not exactly there. There is NXYZ, which is coming up to an extent. Even Dune or Morales, etc., are also doing certain aspects of how you guys are doing. So that is one. The second part is people who can maybe vertically integrate, like your Infuras, to come to indexing, or your Microsofts or Googles who have done this in Web2 and may want to do this in Web3, right? So there is a lot of, therefore, competitive forces that can come into play. So how do you think about competition from your perspective?
Yeah, before I actually directly answer that question, let me just take a detour and talk about some resources that might be helpful for listeners on how
Hmm.
to think about competition. So, my go-to guide on competition is Peter Thiel's book Zero to One. In that, he has a chapter, "Competition is for Losers." And so, I would highly recommend. I'm not even going to distill the lessons from that chapter.
Mm-hmm.
So, you want to get to a monopoly position. You want to get to like some kind of sticky position ASAP. So that's guided a lot of our thinking. So, if the listeners haven't read that chapter, you can actually literally Google "competition to the losers." It's a Peter Thiel essay. It was a Stanford lecture that has been rewritten as a book chapter. So that's like step number one. Step number two, I think generally what is happening in technology is that any kind of linear business model is always at the risk of evaporation. And what a linear business model means is that you have costs on one side and profits on the other side. So essentially, your CAC and your top line revenue are linear. So it's the input and the output. And I think the classic example of that is Slack versus Microsoft Teams. So I would encourage your listeners to just Google Slack versus Microsoft Teams and do a image search on the traction. So Slack started out with a great fanfare, super solid team. Butterfield was excellent. Actually, they started in Vancouver, so we know that extended team there. And then what Microsoft Teams did is they started 4 years ago. They basically cloned Slack. But then what they did is they slapped Teams with their enterprise distribution channels.
Mm.
So I'm not kidding you. In 2 years, they caught up with what Slack traction had in like 7 years. Now, today, Teams is 10 times the size of Slack, 10x the size of Slack. So it just shows you that any kind of linear business model is always at the risk of disruption. So if you're thinking of a SaaS product and you think of your cost of customer acquisition on the other side, without any kind of flywheels, without any kind of like stickiness, without kind of a network effect or a platform effect, you are at the risk of disruption. So with that context in mind, what is going on in Covalent is a couple of things in making sure we cement our leadership, right? So like I said, we should always be on our feet. We can never be complacent because there can be any platform shift, any technology shift that could just torpedo us, right? One example is like if a non-EVM chain reaches massive adoption, then as a percentage of the entire indexer space, Covalent will be a smaller TAM. So I'm just telling you, like, it doesn't matter if you're the number one, the market forces can make you irrelevant, right? So I'm just saying, like, you got to be cognizant of all that. So there's a couple of things that are like pretty interesting here. So anyone who doesn't have a unified API is basically dead right now, right? Because it's too much work for the developer to move from blockchain to blockchain to blockchain. Basically, every single competitor that has pivoted to a unified API today, right? So that's like one thing with the stickiness. Second thing is with the decentralized network. That is also in terms cementing our leadership. Now, you cannot put any of the centralized providers in the same bucket as Covalent, because in the next 5 years, Covalent's stack will dominate every kind of use case, because all of the institutional adoption, in enterprise adoption use cases will run Covalent nodes internally. So in many ways, we're actually not competing with the Google and the Microsoft and the Amazons, because they will run Covalent infrastructure and join this network as opposed to competing with our network. So if you look back to the database world, Amazon has a very toxic relationship with a lot of the open source providers. So if you take MongoDB or Elasticsearch, these are databases. So Elasticsearch, these are all public companies. All this data is public, by the way. What happened to MongoDB is that Amazon just went and cloned MongoDB and then ran it internally in a proprietary kind of infrastructure and never gave back to that public good, which is MongoDB. That's why they had to change the license. And then when MongoDB had their own MongoDB cloud, which is called Atlas, now they're your partner, your distribution partner, and you have channel conflict. So that same thing happened with Elasticsearch. In the case of Covalent, that's not going to happen, because from day one, it's not like a commercial company and a public good. It's actually the network that is operational and then a commercial entity. So I think, again, this is all very early. It would make a lot more sense for these guys to run Covalent nodes and join the infrastructure, because that's how they would get the traction and get the adoption, as opposed to building a competing network. With regards to NXYZ, with regards to any of the centralized providers, it's a game of adoption and traction. So here, if you have the best product, if you have the best distribution, if you have the best, like it's just standard business acumen, right? So this is why we hustled so hard to get all the RPC vendors, like focus. Like there's a quote in some of the like startup circles that first time founders focus on product, second time founders focus on distribution, right? So that's why we like distribution, right? We have a whole GTM team that does distribution. So we've closed half a dozen RPC providers. So in some cases, we are neutralizing that threat of these RPC vendors building their own data products. So in the case of like ChainStack, in the case of Pocket, Now these guys are
Mm.
pretty massive. Like ChainStack has,
Yep.
I think, over 5,000 paying customers. They're massive as an RPC vendor. Morales is a bit of a different bucket. They started as RPC. We could have partnered with them, but now they've moved to a data product. So I'm not sure what's going on there.
Mm.
They don't have a backend stack that is decentralized. So it's not clear what's happening there, but clearly they're very successful. They've been excellent in their go-to-market approach. But I'm saying that if you have a linear product where you have like costs and profits, you're
Mm.
at the risk of someone coming
Yep.
in and just stealing your thunder from underneath. Because what they have, like fundamentally, like this is what you have to think, right? If you look at your SKUs and you look at your revenue spread across your different SKUs for a like an RPC vendor or your like indexer, I would say the top five SKUs account for 80% of the revenue.
Mm.
So you basically have to just clone those top five, and that's it, right? And then suddenly, you attach it with everything else that's going on in the cloud. So I would say if Amazon or Google were to build an indexer, it would actually put NXYZ and those guys under threat. This is basically what's happening with Alchemy to RPC space, right?
Mm.
They raised over 400, $500 million, but now every cloud hyperscaler is building their own RPC vendor,
Yep.
RPC service, right? So Google has come out with one, Amazon is coming out with another, and so now it's like it's kind of like a difficult situation with Alchemy. So I think that's my overall parlay. But in the end, nothing comes down to um, product market fit and better, faster, cheaper, better, faster, cheaper, right? So that's our
Yep.
mantra. Make the APIs faster, make it cheaper, make it better, make it faster. Just keep doing that again and again and again. And that's why all of the updates that we've seen over the past like couple of
Yep.
quarters has been just emphasized on that. So so the stickiness just improves more and more.
Got it. No, that's brilliant. And for our audience who haven't read 0 to 1 yet, I'll just put a link in the notes as well for your benefit. Is this like a winner takes all market indexer, or do you think like multiple big indexers can exist given how vast it is and how disparate the various chains will also be over a period of time?
No, it won't be a winner takes all. It'll be like a top leader and a second leader, and then there'll be a
Mm.
long tail of bespoke custom indexers. So that's generally how these markets play out. It's similar to the CRM market. Salesforce is your number one,
Yep.
but HubSpot and all those guys are still at the $100 million mark, right? They're
Yep.
smaller CRMs. So I don't think it's a winner takes all, right? Unless you make it a true kind of platform, which is where we're doing with a Classy and stuff, where people
Mm.
will build on top of your indexer and extend the platform. So then it'll become the dominant. Basically, you need to address all of the use cases, right? And the only way
Yep.
you can address all the use cases is if you make it truly extensible.
Correct. Yep. Fair enough. How does like the security network token fit into all of this, both now and like in future? If you could also elaborate a bit on that.
Sure. Just some context here, just to tell you about how these ideas came about at a time where the ideas and the norms were different. Back
Mm.
in 2018-19, the go-to token model was a payment token. And we shied away from that because we've always wanted the enterprise institutional adoption, and an institution is never going to hold on to digital assets to pay for like crypto.
Yep.
They're not going to pay for service using crypto. They don't want the volatility. The custodians are like messy. It's just a mess. So we've always indexed the demand side to fiat. That's from day one. That's never changed. And now you're seeing like a lot of other guys also start to do that from back then. Like the graph is now moving to this model. So
Mm.
fundamentally, the demand side is paid in fiat. That can be either through Stripe, so credit card payments, or through stablecoins, through a smart contract directly. And then that fiat is converted to CKT through a market buy mechanism. And then the CKT is distributed to all of the operators who are servicing the network, the query nodes, the indexer nodes, the storage nodes, and the extractor nodes, and so on. So that's essentially how the thing works. Now, CKT itself is a fixed supply token. There's no inflation. So there's no additional supply. The supply has always been 1 billion. And so the more the demand grows, the more the floor price of CKT increases because of the buy pressure that happens from the demand side. So that's generally how this entire economy operates. So that's the core bulk of the use case. And then you have CKT, which is unlocked for different kinds of things. You can stake CKT to create these Class C endpoints. You can do like lots of other things that are still emerging, and then there's a whole set of use cases with like dexes and lending and so on as just as a commodity. So that's generally how I think. But the core gameplay here, or the core loop here, is the demand is pushing the buy pressure for the token.
Got it. Got it. Understood. Yeah. And yes, I mean, I think the payment token for payment service has probably not worked anywhere except for Binance for their native token. Yeah, and I think it's pretty smart to keep it more in fiat from that standpoint. So fair enough. What's coming next for you guys? Can you like give us like some sort of like insights into what is it that you're excited about for 2023 and maybe slightly beyond as well?
Absolutely. So I think it's become very clear where we're good at and where we're not good at, and we just want to stick to what we're good at and excel at that. So now the future is not about like spreading ourselves to a thing, but really dominating in the use cases that we can address. So on the supply side, on the indexing side, we are going to go hardcore into the app chain. So we are yet to announce we closed another big deal with a big app chain ecosystem. There's going to be 100 chains live by end of the year. So that's
Wow.
pretty exciting. So that's all of the app chains that outsource their security to the L1. So hardcore on all of those on the supply side. So all the rollups, OP Stack, ZK Sync, Polygon, it just goes on. So that's going to be huge. On the demand side, what we have is the core infrastructure, but what we lack is the deeper integration with the industry. So let's take GameFi, for example. Now, what these gaming developers want is they don't want an API. They want an SDK. They want a Unity plugin. They want to see all of the assets. So we're partnering with a couple of SDKs to enable that use case there. So you can just go, npm install some SDK, gaming SDK, and then you can build an NFT gallery within your Unity gameplay. So there, the SDK is built by a partner, but the data behind the NFT market, the sale transactions, all of that stuff is built by Covalent. So we're doing the same thing with the NFT space. So in the NFT space, there's some use cases that we would never get in. So NFT valuation of assets, for example. Now we're not a valuation expert. We don't have the finance background, or neither the interest nor the appetite. So there you partner with these guys who can build the machine learning models and then build these sophisticated models, right? Same thing with fraud analytics. Same thing with like token holder distribution and so on. Same thing with DeFi, right? We're never going to build a DeFi protocol, but a lot of these newer cutting edge DeFi protocols now rely on Covalent's data to power a lot of the use cases. So that's what's happening on the demand side. Besides that, the Covalent network is a decentralization. So phase 2 of the network is launching in Q2. So that's pretty exciting. We're going to be doing an incentivized testnet. Later this year, there's going to be an L1 launch for Covalent itself. So right now we rely on Moonbeam for our settlement, and that relationship has been great. But I think in terms of the security, in terms of not another bridge hack like the last time, we want to have control over that stack. So moving to our own L1, which could either be a rollup or a L2 or a standalone L1, doesn't matter. It's just a settlement chain on the backend. Security will always be a ERC20 asset on Ethereum. So that's something to look forward to. And then just more, better, faster, cheaper APIs. So we've done tremendous amount of infrastructure work with the Balances V3 engine, the NFT caching engine. We are releasing a couple of security products. So like approvals, transaction simulation. We're doing like more like wallet labeling stuff. So you have human decoded transactions now. So if you look at a transaction in Etherscan, it doesn't really tell you, it's not that useful. But we've decoded every single DeFi transaction, every lending transaction, every DEX transaction, every NFT transaction. So it'll be human readable. Maybe there's some rumors in the office that we're going to build a block explorer. That's like the next kind of like move. So yeah, just I think at heart we're builders. There's one more thing, one more idea I want to talk about. How companies, when they hit a certain scale, they would rather acquire companies and grow through acquisitions rather than build new products, because building new products is too risky. I'm not comfortable with that idea, but that's probably what's best for Covalent, to go and acquire some of these emerging companies. So maybe there's a couple of like partnerships down there for this year.
Wow, definitely not a bear market, man. With all that is going on, no, it's incredible. And thanks for sharing all of that. I know we're pushing to the end as well. I just want to take a couple of minutes of your time to see if you have any specific plans for India, and also if you had any specific message for founders of Indian origin as well. Given you've done this multiple times, in terms of any do's or don'ts, or like any sort of like learnings that you can share from people of a similar ilk.
Absolutely. So I one is a counter message to the Western audience, right? Don't discount India. I think a lot of people look at pictures of India and it's still, the slums and all that stuff. But today is not that India. If you look at the GDP growth, or let's take another more insightful chart, the number of people who've crossed out of poverty line, India has been the fastest. So 15 years ago, Nigeria and India were, as a percentage of the population, at the same poverty rate. And India is the line is like vertical, right? So there's a lot more of a domestic audience in India today. So that's the pretext here. I think the books that you read from like 15 years ago, they're all outdated, right? Those things are not valid anymore. When I was
Yep.
recently in Chennai, I'd gone to Uti to one of the tea estates, and it was so interesting to see that nobody on the tea estates were actually Tamilians who were working there. They're all like people from the far, like the from Assam and from
Mm,
Bihar and from Manipur and all of these
yep.
and Sikkim. Because the GDP, like nobody there, it's almost like the problem we have in California, where the Californians don't want to work on the fields because it's too
Yeah.
hard, right? So India is a very different place here. Second thing is that if you're trying to build a product, be very clear about your audience. I think it's very difficult to build a product for the Western audience sitting in India. It's also very difficult to build for the Indian audience sitting here in the West.
Mm,
So I think the domestic markets are super massive. I think there's just a lot that is lost in translation. So if you're building outside of even crypto, right? If you're building a product, be very clear on who your audience is. If you see the equivalent of Shark Tank in India, those products that I watch that all the time. Besides the drama, the products that are coming out are also like really really catered to the domestic audience.
yep.
Really very exciting to see all of this. People taking that step towards building for the domestic market. So that's pretty interesting. So yeah, I think that's what's I saying. I think that the world is. I think the opportunity is abundant, right? So it's not a closed market anymore. I think if you have the right mindset and if you hustle hard to get the right partners on board, I think there's just no. It's so much fun to just build and show value to the world, and make something meaningful that outlives you, right? Leaving a lasting legacy. So I would say, think big. I think we definitely have the DNA in India,
Mm.
and I think it's just more people should go and start companies rather than doing these placement exams, I guess.
Yeah, I've been guilty of that as well, studying in India, it probably seeps through in the mentality and also the way you're brought up. But no, I see a market change in terms of how people are looking at entrepreneurship than when I graduated 15 years ago, right? So I think there's a market change, which is for the good. But no, those are great and wise words. And we can conclude with that, in my opinion. So, Ganesh, thanks a lot for your time. And this has been great. Lovely to understand how you're thinking of Covalent and also the general space on indexing and data. And wish you all the best with your entire pursuit at Covalent. And of course, we are supporters, but also well wishers of you and Covalent. So, any final thoughts you would like to share, or else we can just close it here.
Prashant, at some point I should interview you in Woodstock, right? So you guys have been tremendous supporters to Covalent, and there's a certain level of conviction that comes in that goes beyond reason. So I think sticking with an entrepreneur through the highs and lows is commendable. So but thank you for doing this podcast. Really enjoyed it. I'm really pumped now. It's only 9:30 a.m. for me, so the rest of the day should be fun.
Wonderful. And Raghu, we missed you, man. But we thought you have hogged all the limelight. So live with it. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
All right, take care. Bye.